Kia ora, good evening, everyone. My name is Stacey Lane. I am part of the Future Students team at Massey University, and it is my pleasure to be hosting the Veterinary Science webinar for 2026. So the purpose of this evening is to run you through some of the process for applying for vet, also the what vet looks like a little bit, and give you an opportunity to ask your questions that we will answer. If you do have questions, you'll see at the top a little kind of speech bubble with a question mark in it. That's the Q&A section. So if you could direct questions into that, please make sure that you don't use any personal details. If your request is particularly specific, we might take this into an email. Make sure maybe that you let Eloise have a good chat before you start requesting all sorts of answers, because she may actually run through what you're about to ask, and we'll let you know if that's likely to happen. All right, I think we are looking pretty good for the beeping coming on with people coming into the lobby. So I would like to welcome you I'd like to welcome Eloise Gillings, who is the Associate Dean for the Vet Program at Massey University, which is no doubt she is the absolute expert here when it comes to chatting you through all of this. Just a wee note that we will be talking about domestic students here. So this is all based on the domestic pathways into vet. And if you are an international student, you will have some different looking pathways, and we will be able to point you in the right direction of finding information about that. So yeah, just a couple of housekeeping. Try not to use the chat up the top. Use Q&A if you have a question. Everyone is muted and cameras off and everything. And we will pass it over to Eloise.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stacey. And so kia ora koutou. It's a pleasure to have you all here with us, and we appreciate you giving us some of your time tonight to come and learn a little bit about the vet program. As Stacey said, my name is Eloise Gillings. I am a veterinarian, and I teach in the vet school, and I'm also Associate Dean for the Veterinary program. So yeah, pretty familiar with the vet program and our vet students over the last, 25 years or so. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Let's just thumbs up, Stacey, for seeing the right thing there. Fantastic.
Yep, we can see it.
So we're going to jump straight into it, folks, because there is a fair bit to cover. And as Stacey said, that often they will post this, a recording of this later. So don't feel like you have to capture every screenshot or things like that, but do whatever you need to do out there. And again, if I can just remind you, questions into the Q&A, please. It makes it way easier for the team to answer. Fabulous. So I guess one of the things that I often think about, and if you've heard me talk before, one of the things I often address is like, why do you actually want to be a vet? Why are you in this room right now? And then you might be going, I don't. I'm here for my child or some kids at school, what have you. But, why do people actually want to go into the veterinary profession? And often it starts off because they really want to help animals. They love animals, which is kind of a good starting reason, but maybe not enough of a reason to do this. Because there's some other good reasons too. Like there's things like you actually get to make a good contribution to society. You get to make a pretty worthwhile salary and things. You're not going to be a billionaire, I can promise you that. I am certainly not. But you do get to have a good standard of living. And there's a broad range of careers that you can do with a vet degree. Now, everybody sort of always thinks about, being like a clinical vet, but there's actually a lot of things, and we'll talk about that too. So there's lots of pros to this role and job, but there's also some cons too. Like you need to have a realistic expectation is that it's not all puppies and kittens. Sometimes it's dirty. Sometimes there are owners who are really angry or upset, often when it's not your fault, but they're a bit stressed or grieving, and you often are the recipient of it. You often work on call, so a 2 a.m. calving out in a back paddock in the freezing rain one night versus you're not always tucked up nicely in clinic and things like that. And you're going to face some tricky situations as a veterinarian that it's not just always straightforward. And so I think I always want to be really clear about that. Because I think sometimes what people think that we do might be a little bit different from what veterinarians actually do. So what are some characteristics then that make a good vet? And So I guess one of the biggest things I'd really like to emphasize is that being a vet is actually a people job, and you really need to like working with people because every animal comes along with somebody. So whether it's a farmer that calls you out to see their stock, whether it's an owner that brings their pet to you, it is a people job. And even when you specialize and you're not in a clinical role, like myself, I don't work in a clinic anymore, but I absolutely work a lot with people. And so it's really, very important that we have good communication skills, um, as well as interpersonal skills. Some other things, I mean, it's nice if you've had a little bit of animal experience. You don't have to have had every kind of animal to come to vet school, though. I guess the things that I'd like to emphasize too, as well as those communication skills, is just having really a little bit of common sense, which turns out it's not always so common. Um, but the ability to actually kind of think clearly through a problem, to analyze information and reach conclusions. And we call that sort of critical thinking. And that's some of the stuff that we'll actually teach you while you're here too. One of the biggest things is, man, vet school is it's tough, and so you really need to be self-motivated, have great time management as well, and the ability to realize that the world doesn't revolve around you. That we need to be able to see other people's perspectives and understand that when we're thinking about and making decisions. So while most people will start off in clinical practice, so that's looking after sick or injured animals or trying to prevent them from becoming unwell in the first place, there's lots of different careers that people do. So people can move, outside of clinical practice. So somebody like me, I haven't actually worked in a veterinary clinic for, gosh, almost 25 years. Other people sometimes go off and work in zoos, in research, in industry. So they might work for big companies that supply pet products like Hills or something. And interestingly, the actual biggest single employer of veterinarians in New Zealand is the government, because veterinarians are incredibly important to our country's biosecurity and our food safety. So there's a whole bunch of different things that we actually do. So I guess one of the things that we really want to focus on is, as you're thinking about this, is just making sure that you're getting prepared. So in terms of life preparation, so not necessarily the academic prep, really one of the things you want to do is practice your organization and your self-motivation. Make sure you're planning your schedules. Get used to actually using a calendar and knowing where you're going and when, and not relying on your parents to have to remind you all the time. Um, you need to get yourself places, and so not being reliant on others. Make sure that if you're coming out of school, that you can do some of the basics of survival, like cook for yourself, do your own laundry. And if you haven't always had the opportunity, get used to engaging with lots of different people. So, I mean, a part-time job in retail is an awesome opportunity to, again, build those social and communication skills. And I kind of I've put there, talk to everyone and anyone and everywhere. All the opportunities, take all the opportunities you can to engage with different people and get comfortable and get used to that. So, parents, this is a little slide for you. I have teenagers myself, one who's off to uni next year, and so I guess what I would say is make sure that you encourage / let your kids actually manage things themselves. If they've got questions about the course or things, get them to contact the university. You can do it with them, but don't take over for them. They really need to learn to both survive and also fail while the consequences are smaller than when the consequence is not getting into vet school. I guess just another quick note to parents is that if your child comes to study with us and they're over 18, due to the Privacy Act, we can't actually talk to you about details about them without their express written permission. So it's sometimes a little bit frustrating, but just wanted to put that out there so that people have a clear expectation. Okay, so that's sort of general life prep, but what about sort of academic preparation? If you look on the website for the courses that you'll take, it talks about the sort of minimum recommended academic preparation, and this is based on NCEA, as they're talking around 14 to 20 credits in level 3 of bio and chemistry, and around 14 to 20 credits in NCEA level 2 of math, plus or minus physics as well. If you've done all 4, even better. And one of the things too is that, university is sometimes a little bit different from high school in that it's not really, there are some internal assessments, but they also have to sit big tests that are much more like external credits. And so getting some good experience with sitting externals while as high school is really, really helpful as well too. So if you've just listened to that slide and you went, oh gosh, I haven't done a lot or any of those courses, what I would say is take the time to actually get prepared. So there are a number of ways that you can do some additional preparation before coming to university, such as foundation studies, other certificates. And we've got this amazing bunch of people called the veterinary advisors who basically they exist to help guide you and to give you the right advice so that you know exactly what you should be doing, when you should be doing it, etc. So please reach out to our veterinary advisors. They are an absolute wealth of information and will really help guide you on your pathway. Now, if you've done what we had on the previous slide, don't do prep stuff. If you're ready to go, awesome. But sometimes it's worth talking to an advisor to get a sense of how ready you are. Okay. So one of the things about applying to vet school is, man, we make you jump through a few hoops. There is 3 separate online applications. So the first one is if you hadn't studied at Massey University before, you're going to apply for admission to the university, and particularly to the BVSC pre-selection semester. This is open now for 2026, for 2027 and 2028. So you can actually get well ahead of the game here. The second application is that you're actually going to apply then for admission to the BVSC degree, and particularly the professional phase, which starts in semester 2. And I'm going to show you some slides of this a little bit later. But basically, to get to the BVSC web pages, if you pop in www.massey.ac.nz/BVSC or Bachelor of Veterinary Science, BVSC, then you can actually get to that application. And that one has a deadline of March 5th. But again, it's open now for the next couple of years, so there's no reason to get anywhere near that deadline. And finally, everyone who applies by that deadline gets sent a link to another thing called the Veterinary Supplementary Application. And that means that you can then complete the final application. And it does have a pretty short deadline, it's just a few days. But then you can complete that final application, which means that you are then in the process for being selected that year. Okay, so 3 separate applications, team, and there is, a little bit. Now, the great thing is they're not onerous. Like, it's not like each one is going to take you hours. You don't have to write essays or anything like that, but you do just have to go in there and pop in your information so that we can make sure that we're getting you admitted to and applied for the right processes. Fabulous. So let's talk about the program itself a little bit. So the Bachelor of Veterinary Science at Massey is the pathway for becoming a veterinarian if you're in New Zealand. The cool thing about it is that we actually we do pretty well on a global scale. So we're the top ranked veterinary school in the Southern Hemisphere. We're the 14th ranked school overall in the world. And to put that into context, there are some countries that literally have hundreds of veterinary schools. And even most impressive, I think, is the fact that we're ranked first in the world for employability. So this is where employers of veterinarians rate who they think produces the best veterinarians. So that's a pretty cool one. I'm super proud about that for us. The other thing too is that the degree is really widely accredited by the American and Canadian Veterinary Medical Associations, by the Royal College of Veterinary Scientists, which is the UK, and by the Australasian Veterinary Boards Council, or AVBC, which enables you to work in Australia, New Zealand, and some parts of Asia as well. So the cool thing about this is it means that you can actually work in a whole bunch of different places around the world. And you have Massey Vet grads kind of popping up all over the show. It's really interesting, actually, where you can find a Massey Vet grad. So let's look at how the program kind of works and some things about numbers. So we take a class size of 175 into the professional phase, but we usually have a lot more applicants than that in the pre-selection phase. And we divide our 175 students into, we've got 125 places for domestic students, and those are subsidized by the government. And then we have 50 places for international students who aren't Kiwis and so are not subsidized by the New Zealand government. I think a really important point to note here is that our domestic and international students are actually in separate pools, so they're not competing against each other for the same seats. If we then think about the program, so the way that it works is if you are coming out of high school or if you haven't studied a lot of science at university before, what you do is come and take what we call the pre-selection courses, which are chemistry, cell biology, biophysical principles, in animals and the environment. And those courses you have to pass in order to be able to be considered for progressing into the professional phase. Then we have the selection process, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. And if you are selected into the professional phase, you go and you're going to have classes and practicals and workshops and things for the next few years through BVC 2 to 4 as well. And the other thing to note too is you're also going to do a little bit of practical work in your holidays. So initially, you're going to do a bit of farm placement. Later in the program, you're going to do more clinical placements outside of the university. And this is just to make sure you've got a really well-rounded view of what clinical practice and farm work is really like. Then we get into our final year. So the final year is what we call our clinical year. So this year is longer than the rest of the years. Instead of just being 2 semesters, it actually goes across almost an entire year. And you spend your time in this year really doing what we call work integrated learning. So you are working in clinics as a veterinary student alongside veterinarians with actual cases. And you do that both here at the university and also at some of our partner practices around the country. You get the opportunity to pick what we call a track. And you can think of a track as like your sort of focus. So you can pick companion animal, mixed with a farm animal focus, or mixed with an equine focus. Now, the key thing is that in all of these tracks, you still have to do some of the weeks the same. Like everybody has to do some experience here in our small animal clinic. Everybody has to do a little bit of equine. Everybody has to do a little bit of farm animal veterinary clinics here as well too. But then where it gets interesting is that you've got a good chunk of the year where you'll be based either at some of our partner practices or sometimes at practices of your choice. So it gives you just, again, a really nice, well-rounded experience. It does mean, though, that you've been with these other people for 4 years, and then all of a sudden, your final year, you're all actually doing slightly different timetables, curricula. You're in different places at different times. Okay, so that's quite a lot, and I am going kind of fast and furious because we're trying to get this information out there, and then we'll have a good bit of time for questions at the end. I really want to focus a little bit on this next side, which is our veterinary curriculum. So the curriculum is what you learn and how you learn it. Now, this only applies to our professional phase, so it's not the pre-vet semester. Okay, the pre-vet semester is what I would call a fairly traditional science education. When you come into the second semester, if you're selected in, we run our curriculum under what's called a competency-based veterinary education framework. So in the back in the day, we used to have a real focus on knowledge. Like, do you know about all this and know about that? And our assessments used to really focus on knowledge. We've moved to, instead of focusing on what you know, we're really focusing on what you can do with what you know. So the assessments are more applied. There's a big focus on your clinical skills and your ability to actually do the different things that veterinarians need to do in practice, particularly when they first start out in practice, what we call day one. One thing I really want to note here is that we have a flipped curriculum or a flipped model for our curriculum. So what this means is we do not do lectures. So when I went to vet school, sometimes we'd sit in lectures for, 4 to 6, sometimes even 7 or 8 hours in a day. And I would be in lectures or labs for probably, 32 to 35 hours a week. Now, things have moved on a little bit, and we know a little bit more about learning now than we did back in my day. And so with a flipped curriculum allows us to take advantage of a little bit of flexibility for you guys about still giving you high quality preparatory material, and then using the staff, instead of just stand up and talk to you or talk at you, using our staff to actually work with you in much more interactive sessions where you can actually apply that learning. So if I was to give you a little bit of an example, let's say if we were trying to think about learning how to do radiology or interpret x-rays, for instance, what we would do is you would do interactive preparatory lessons where you are looking at information, you're going through cases, it gives you info, and then you're applying it as you go. And then you would actually come to a tutorial having already done that preparatory work and ready to actually participate more in that tutorial. Okay, and we do that for pretty much everything. So that goes all the way from learning about animal science-based things to learning about cardiology or what have you. So one of the things I just want to highlight with this, and why I talked about a little bit earlier in terms of skills that you need to be successful at university, and particularly in the veterinary program, is being self-motivated and organized. Now, I know that is not like everybody's strength, but I just want to really highlight this now so that you know this coming into it. So that if you know you're not the most organized now, thinking about what can I do and what strategies can I put in place to help with that. You know, if you know that it's really hard to motivate yourself, thinking about what are those things that I can do to help with that, you know, whether it's the tech I need to use, whether it's working with other people, etc. Now, the cool thing about this competency-based veterinary education curriculum is that what it does is it kind of divides what we're going to teach you up into 9 different areas or domains of competence. And you can see them on the right-hand side of your slide there. Um, and it talks about, you know, things like clinical reasoning. So it's you really be able to think through a clinical case, whether that's for small animals or individual animals or herds of animals. Thinking about the way veterinarians also interact and their influence in public health. You know, if we think about certain diseases that can actually pass between animals and humans, obviously vets have a really valuable role to play there. You know, I talked about communication being important and the ability to work with others, and those are really core aspects of the curriculum as well too. And it's all the way through to, yeah, we actually need to learn some things about finance too, you know, and how a clinic works and how you actually bill a client and, you know, the way you might quote for work. And finally, scholarship or research. Basically, we need to know how to be able to, you know, ask a good question and then find answers to those kinds of questions based on the evidence and the research that's out there. So it is a big curriculum. You will be very busy while you're in the veterinary program. And so I just need to be so clear about that is that, you know, while you might have some friends doing other degrees who might have 12 hours a week, you will not. You will be working considerably more. And so I just need to be clear about that, team, so that we have a fair and reasonable expectations before we start the degree. Okay. Let's think about then how do you actually get selected? So obviously we said that in that pre-selection phase of the first semester, there can be a lot more people, and then we have to select only 175 to progress into semester 2 or the professional phase from year onward, from that first year onwards. So if I kind of show you this little bit of a diagram, is that I'm just going to give us the overall picture, but I'm really going to focus on on domestic students. Is that in our class, like we said, of 175, we have domestic students and we also have international students. So our domestic students, we actually select them in 2 different groups, ones who are new to university and those who have actually had university experience before. And then they're subdivided into our general and our VetMap pathway. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We also divide our international students into 2 groups. Ones who are called Group 2, we're picking on based on their experience from overseas. The others called Group 1, they actually come here and do a semester just like our New Zealand students do. Okay, so I did just mention the word VetMap there. So with our group A and B domestic students, we have both general and VetMap students. So if I highlight VetMap, this is a pathway for our domestic students with Māori and Indigenous Pacific heritage, who what we do is we provide a little bit of additional holistic support for these students in terms of both cultural, academic, and personal support. And the best way to think about this is where the way our VetMap students talk about it is that VetMap's sort of like, you know, whānau away from whānau. So it allows them to really get that sense of connection and belonging to others. And there's a number of different reasons why we do this, but particularly in recognition of the fact that the veterinary profession is wildly non-representative of the broader New Zealand population. And so in order to serve the population well, it's better for us to actually reflect the population a little bit better too. Now, there is going to be a specific VetMap session, so I won't focus on that in this talk tonight. It's usually in mid-October. The date's still to be confirmed, but that always comes up on our website when we start talking about open day. Then we have that date confirmed for those who would want to register for that info session as well. Okay, so let's just have a look then at what the criteria are in terms of being eligible to be selected for that professional phase. So irrespective of whether you're an international student, domestic, general, or VetMap, every student has to meet the same criteria in order to be eligible for selection. So first thing is you got to do is you have got to submit the applications by the various different due dates, team. So this is unlike sometimes, in New Zealand we're a little bit flexy on some stuff. These ones actually matter. And so we do need to get those done by the right dates, and you'll want to actually get them done well in advance where possible. You will have wanted to have done a little bit of practical work in a veterinary clinic. We require 40 hours. And truly, this is really, I'll speak about it a bit more, but it's more for your benefit and interest than us. You need to pass all the prerequisite classes, achieve the minimum GPA, and then also complete the selection assessments. So let's talk about each of those. So your prac work is just really so that or you get at least a little bit of a glimpse about what a veterinarian actually does behind the scenes. It is quite different to what we'll necessarily see when you take a pet there, or if if a vet comes out to your farm. So we do require this to be clinical. So it can't be like SPCA or zoo or wildlife rescue. You have to be actually with veterinarians, seeing what a veterinarian does. And they can be small animal, large animal, whichever. Like we said, 40 hours, so basically 1 week within the last 3 years. And it can be, if it needs to be, it can be done outside of New Zealand as well too. And that has to be signed off by somebody from the clinic as part of your application. I really would just like to highlight too that you'll want to do this before you come to the university, because once you start, there really isn't time to get this done. So please make sure you organized to do this before you ever actually come to Massey. The next thing we said is you had to pass the prerequisite classes. So those courses are, so we've got a chemistry class, biophysical principles, cell biology, and animals and the environment. And you need to pass those classes or the equivalent to them at another university. We calculate something called a grade point average. Now, we don't do this in NCAA, so it may not be familiar to some people, but a GPA is just a way that we calculate a number that kind of represents your overall academic performance. In New Zealand, the range for this is between a 0, so failing grades are 0, whereas through to our top grade of an A+ is worth a 9. And what you have to do is to even be eligible for a selection, you need to have a GPA of at least a 5 or a B average or higher. And so I can see there's actually just a tiny little error on this, is that the way that we calculate your GPA is from your courses only. So if you have 4 courses and you were to get a B in all of those, then your overall would be a B. If you had a mix of Bs and A's, then you would get it calculated, you'd be somewhere between a B and an A. So the GPA is something a little bit different, but it's absolutely something that we will calculate for you, so you don't have to worry about calculating it yourself. If you've studied before, though, then you'll definitely want to talk to one of our amazing advisor teams who can actually help you understand where you're sitting. If you're coming from high school, then your GPA is a 0 to start with, and we calculate it just on the basis of your grades in the courses here. Okay. Final thing too, so that's some of our academic assessments. So is your GPA, passing all your prerequisites. Then we're going to move on to our non-academic assessments, or things that are outside of your GPA and the passing the courses. Now, one of the things too is that when you get here, you're going to sign a confidentiality agreement about these, which means that as part of your selection application, you agree that you won't share the contents of the selection assessments. And we do take things like confidentiality and professionalism pretty seriously here in the vet school, because you are if you're going to be veterinarian training, you do need to actually maintain confidentiality and things. So it does mean that if somebody does break that confidentiality, then it does mean that they may be excluded from the selection process. So it's a little bit high stakes, team. So you want to make sure that you, again, just start that professionalism development now. So one of the tests that you'll sit is called the STAT test. It is for all students. It's 2-hour multiple choice test that is quite time restricted, so you got to be pacey in it. It assesses your critical thinking and problem solving using written and numerical material. So you might read a passage of text and answer questions. You might look through like a math problem solving question, again, and answer questions about this. It happens on the Manawatu campus, usually in mid-March. And there is a fee for it, but we pay for that out of the single vet selection fee that you will pay. And we'll give you a little, we will provide a practice link to all those students who have actually applied for selection all the way through. The next thing we do is something called the Casper assessment. So this one is to assess your non-academic attributes like teamwork and critical thinking and ethical reasoning, etc. So this one is actually a online assessment. So you need to have a computer with excellent broadband or fiber and a webcam. And what they'll do is they'll show you video scenarios and written scenarios that are set in regular life context. So they're not vet specific. And then you'll be asked to either write or record your responses to questions about those scenarios. Again, this one happens in mid-March also, and the fee for this is included in your veterinary selection application fee. Okay. Then later on in the semester, so mid to late May, we have our multiple mini interview or MMI. Now, when we have a large number of applicants in a year, we may actually have to shortlist for this. So everyone who's invited to the MMI is who would participate. Some years we can invite everybody. Other years we do have to do a little bit of a selection, a little bit of a shortlisting process to take certain students through to the MMI. So this is again on the Manawatu campus. And again, the costs of doing this are included in your vet selection application fee. And what the MMI is it's basically a series of short little interviews with different interviewers. So you'll go to 8 different stations and meet with 8 different individuals. At each station, you'll read a scenario and it has some questions associated with it. You'll consider those questions. You've got at least 2 minutes to prep for that. And then you'll go into the room and discuss your thoughts about those questions with the interviewer in that room for up to 6 minutes. So it's sometimes referred to as interview speed dating because we have really short interactions with a number of different people. And it's almost like a little circuit, essentially. So everybody starts, 8 different people on that particular track will all start a different seat. And after the 8 minutes, we'll all advance to the next one until you've completed all 8 stations for just over an hour in total. So again, team, we've talked about before that communication is really important, your ability to chat to different people, and this is when it really comes into the fore. So again, the more practice we can get with that, the better it is for you, team. Okay, so if I just summarize it, I've talked about some of the different assessments, but if we summarize it, the first stage is we have to have completed our vet prac work and we set the STAT and the Casper assessments. If we need to be shortlisted, then we would use those assessments to shortlist who's actually invited to the interview stage in stage 2. So then what we'll do is we'll make a final selection in stage 2. So we need to know that you've met those eligibility criteria. You have to have a GPA of at least a 5. You have to have passed all those prerequisite courses. And then we do a ranking on your MMI and Casper score. And for our international students, if they haven't been educated in English, there's a English language assessment that they would need to also meet. So the question that people often ask too is going, okay, so I do all this, but what happens if I'm not actually selected? So the good news is that you can actually reapply again in the future, but there is a limit. You can apply 3 times. And so if you don't get in the first time, what you'll really want to do is, again, talk to one of our veterinary advisory team, because they will help you decide, what is the best option from there. If you need to improve your grades, you'd switch into an alternate program and study more to improve your grades. If you want to reapply again and your grades are good, you might just switch into the program and really work on your communication and interpersonal skills. So it really does just depend, if you're planning on applying again the next year or in a couple of years. But again, the advisors are the best people to help you with that. And we always do a talk to all our veterinary applicants in late May as well to make sure people are thinking about their alternate plan and program options, just in case that the selection process doesn't go the way that they would want. Okay, so let's just do a few final notes before we wrap up and get into our question time. So I guess this one is probably like for some of you a parent page, for some of you, older students, this would be a U page, but tuition fees. So I guess what does this really cost? So a domestic student this year is just over $15,000 New Zealand, and international students are just over $84,000 per year New Zealand. So again, we do get liberal government subsidization here, and so as domestic students, that explains the big difference in those fees. Another cost is what we call non-tuition fees. So there are some university fees and other course associated costs. If you're going to live in the halls, then obviously that's another fee as well too. Where we can, I guess, potentially be aware is that often if you were going to work for a paid job all summer, sometimes you will need to do practical work, as I had mentioned earlier on. There's 19 weeks that you'll need to do across the degree that comes in your breaks. And so it does mean that there's a little bit less summer prac work. And on a slightly positive note, then there's also some scholarships as well too. So I think that they range, from a few hundred to around about 10,000. So you can't necessarily plan to fund your whole education on these, but they're certainly helpful when you're successful in getting them. So some key dates, so this is quite a useful page if you want to snap a picture of this one potentially, is on the 5th of August, we've got open day here on the Manawatu campus. And if you haven't been here before, I really strongly advise you to come and check it out. It's, so you can actually see what the halls are like and what the campus is like and get a little bit of a sense of a feeling for the town as well too. On the 1st of November, for students who are applying through the VetMap pathway, that's the early deadline for VetMap applications. On the semester 1 starts in 2027 in late February, so Monday, February 22nd. And we will talk to the students again when they first arrive. We'll make sure everybody understands the selection process, because then very shortly thereafter, we've got that March 5th deadline, which is a super important deadline for making sure that we've actually got our application process in on time so that we can be considered. And then a few days later is that veterinary supplementary application. Okay, so it is really important to be aware of these dates and make sure that we are hitting them along the way. Okay, so if you want to find out more information, where do you go? So obviously you go to our veterinary pages about the Bachelor of Veterinary Science. So again, you can enter www.massey.ac.nz/BVSC, or you can just Google Massey BVSC. If you Google it, it should be the first hit, Bachelor of Veterinary Science at Massey University. And if you click on there against page, it should look like this at the top of the page. And you can see here there's this yellowy orange apply to study button. And that's to, you'd click on that to submit your professional phase BVSC application that you need to do by March 5th. And as I said, it's open now for 2027. It's usually open now for 2028 as well too. So there's no reason why not to get that done well in advance. One of the things that I just want to add to is that there's a lot of information on these pages. There's a lot of words, holy moly. But it's something I would strongly encourage you to read through. And I would also take it as a bit of a litmus test for you. If you're finding reading this web page tough in terms of volume, man, vet school is going to be a rough road because you will read an absolute truckload in vet school. There is so much to learn. And so it's a good habit to, if you're not a big reader right now, start now. Read through this entire page. And make sure that you've got a sense of what's actually in there. Because then if it hasn't answered all of your questions, the next contact then is to go to your veterinary advisors. So we have a team of 3 folks, so James Sienny and Victoria Jane, and they are specifically trained around the veterinary program and giving you the advice about the veterinary program. I really want to encourage you to please don't ask your vet about vet selection processes. Things have changed since they graduated. Even if they graduated in the last couple of years, things have changed a little bit. So please make sure that you don't ask them or you don't ask your chem lecturer, and things when you come here. Please make sure you're talking to the veterinary advisors because those are the people whose advice that we will actually stand by. You can reach them or any part of the university by emailing contact@massey.ac.nz. That's the first point of contact. You'll want to put veterinary selection advice in your subject line if you're emailing them, because then it gets triaged to them more quickly. And it's really helpful if you put your name, your date of birth, and your address in the body of the email so that those staff on the contact desk don't just send it back to you and ask you to provide those things. So it's much quicker for you if you provide them from the get-go. And again, I've said this a bit earlier on, but our advisors are such a wealth of information. And so if you have done any previous university study, you absolutely need to contact one of our advisors to talk about, to find out what grades count and what doesn't, and what group that you're going to be in, etc. And to make sure that you're on track to do the things that you need to do to be eligible for selection. Okay, team, that was a lot. And so I'm going to wrap it up there in terms of the talk specifically, and I'm just going to then open up, and some of the folks in the background will let me know what questions that you have that need answering.
All right. Thank you so much, Eloise. I'm always amazed at how much information you can get through in a very short 40 minutes. So well done. So thank you all for sticking with us. We're gonna throw some questions at Eloise in a moment. But first I will reiterate absolutely there is a ton of events happening over the next few months that give you the perfect opportunity to come to the campus in Palmerston North and have a look around and get a feel for the place. I would absolutely suggest open day on the 5th of August as the top priority. That is one of the only days of the year that the School of Veterinary Science will actually open up its doors and let visitors come through and look at all of the amazing technology and the way that we do our teaching. There's also a brand new shiny building that you can come and have a look at, which only opened this year. So absolutely, if you can make it to open day, that is the day to come. And that can be for any age person. You don't have to be a year 13 to come to that. And I will email out everyone that's registered when I get the video for this. I'll email that out. If you can't make open day, we do run future students tours on Fridays, and I will also email out the link to that. We will generally go for a walk around the campus, look at the vet buildings, and also we have a standing appointment with academic advice. So it's a great time to come and meet the team in person. Um, the other alternative as well, just if you have some interest in animals, is that we're also in the school holidays in July running a couple of days that aren't necessarily veterinary science based, but will give you a little bit of an idea of what life looks like in the sciences. So on the 7th of July, there is Animals and Agriculture Day. And on the 9th of July is Biology Day, which will include zoology. So both of those days are open to year 11, 12, and 13 students who want to come and be a student for the day. So, Louise, we have a whole ton of questions, and the academic advice team in the background have done an amazing job answering them. Um, there was a couple of questions around sort of what does the average day look like for a student and sort of once they're in professional phase, and is this more sort of online teaching or in person?
Yeah, it's a mix. So usually you will need to be on campus for in-person sessions every day. It's just that what we don't do is we don't do traditional lectures. And so when you're coming onto campus, it'll be for things like tutorials with staff. So that might be you've done some of the preparatory material already, and you're coming to tutorial where we're going to, answer questions, clarify tricky concepts, and then think about how does that material actually apply. So thinking about might be cases or scenarios that we're going to actually use that with. So an average day, there is no such thing as an average day in the life of a veterinary student. It's a real mix of both completing their preparatory material and then also the face-to-face sessions. But right now, for each of the years, you do need to be on campus usually every day for something. Again, whether it's tutorial, workshop, labs, pracs, etc. So there's definitely, you're not required to be on campus for the same number of hours as traditionally. So, but it varies, every week it can be between 12 to 18, 20 hours, just depending on what your group is doing in that week. Okay, so it can be a little bit individualized.
All right. There was just a question that's popped up about scholarships that people can apply for, or and I know certainly there isn't necessarily a lot in the pre-vet semester, but what kind of things could students be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're a pre-vet, yes, there isn't very much. When you're actually into the veterinary school, there are scholarships that are advertised like through the university. But then as you progress in the degree, there's also clinics that offer scholarships as well too for students for coming and doing placements and things and covering costs, etc. for that at their clinics. And those are quite cool scholarships because helps keep your costs down, but it also enables you to actually have a look at those clinics and see what they're like. because one of the most important things about when you take your very first job as a veterinarian is to make sure it's a place that really fits for you, that you get on well with the people, because, that first job is going to be really influential in your career development. And so the opportunity to kind of have a look inside clinics is actually really, really helpful as well. But yeah, so they have ones that are school specific, university level, and then also clinic level scholarships as well too.
And certainly worth keeping in mind for pre-vet, for students out there. You can still apply for our undergraduate school leavers accommodation, and some of the other sort of general scholarships.
Mm-hmm.
We've got one here about whether it's possible to apply straight from year 12 with discretionary entry, or if they need to complete year 13.
So there is some specific rules around that, and it's probably a little bit more complex. And even it's not something that I keep on top of because it's handled outside of the vet school in terms of discretionary. Because what you're getting is discretionary entrance to that pre-selection semester, which is a general science semester. But it is possible. It's just it doesn't happen all of the time, things. So it is something that you would need to apply for, and then you often need to supply a little bit more additional information and things.
Perfect. And certainly the life experience that comes with going right through school works. Would you have any advice for students that possibly want to take a gap year before coming to veterinary science?
Yep, go for it. I think so. It could be because you want to save some money up. It could be because you just, you want to just have a little bit of a break and do something different. But again, that year, depending on what you're doing, it will not be a wasted year. Like as long as you're getting out there, doing different things, having different experiences, meeting different people, engaging with lots of people, that kind of stuff will actually be helpful for you for both getting into, but then also being successful in the veterinary profession once you're out of vet school.
Perfect answer. Love it. Also, any savings you can have, the less you have to work in first
Yeah.
year for vet, the easier life gets.
Totally. It is. And
Um,
actually, what I should say about that when we think about cost, because it is a more expensive program than studying in, say, like a Bachelor of Science or a BA. But it's because it's actually really expensive to educate vet students. We have to run a hospital, we have to have farms and things like that. So it is, like when you look at the tuition, you'll see that it is higher in vet school than in like the pre-selection semester or other degrees. And so, yeah, getting a little money behind you, helpful. If we don't all have the benefit of bank mum and dad, a little bit of savings goes a long way.
there's one in here about the approximate cost of non-tuition fees.
Oh, I would love to give you a number on that, but I don't actually know it that well. Somebody
Yeah,
else may,
perfect.
and so
We
somebody else might know
will
in the background. But yeah,
we will hope the typing people in the background will jump on that one.
yeah,
Certainly, I would suggest, especially if you're coming in from outside of Palmerston North, to come and have a look at the halls, and have a look at accommodation on the Massey campus,
mhm.
because you will not only be really close to all your lectures, the fact that we'll feed you is also just one less thing your brain has to deal with. And science would say that you are far more likely to be successful staying on in the halls of residence rather than flatting. So certainly that would be my advice for anyone out there. There is a few questions in here that are kind of specific to certain subjects that people have or haven't done, and my recommendation would absolutely be to reach out to the academic advice team in your own time, because they can give you some very specific advice about the kind of subjects potentially that you can, or the things you can do to make up that knowledge, without necessarily breaking the bank, which is always a good one. We don't want you to have to do more study than you need to.
Yeah, I can sort of see in the questions there's a lot around like the type of maths to take, and I guess I would just say um, the answer to all of them is yes. Yes, maths. Like so, maths is it's about the math skills, and the more that we're doing math and getting just really comfortable with um, the ideas of just I call it like your actual like your familiarity, your numeracy. So for instance, I'm going to give you an example. Sometimes we give students something to calculate and you go, right, you've got a 10-kilo dog and you want to calculate this various different kind of medication. And they come back and they go, yeah, we'll give it a liter of fluid. And you have to go, a liter? 10-kilo dog, a liter of fluid, like, is that actually going to fit in a dog? And so getting those ideas of the sense of numbers is really helpful. So all the maths are helpful. But again, the more you do, the better. And same with physics. This is all, you're reinforcing all those problem solving skills. So I wouldn't say this one versus that one. The advisors might have some other perspectives on that too, but again, just more maths, more physics is more helpful.
Perfect. I got here.
There was one I just saw about thinking about those domestic places, the 125 domestic places, and how we allocate them amongst the groups. It's proportional to the number of applicants. So, if a year if there was half were Group A applicants and half were Group B, then half the places would go to Group A's, half would go to Group B. So we don't have we don't have a pre-specified number. It's based on each year, and I think that's important to know for a few different things. Is I can't sort of say like what the magic cutoff would be for a test or things like that, because it depends on the number of students applying and the strength of the applicant pool in that particular year.
Possibly also on that note, there's a few questions about whether you're able to tell us roughly this year in 2026 how many students are in the pre-vet semester.
Oh, and it's an interesting thing. So we used to really push the numbers out quite a lot. But we found what it often tended to do is not actually give people clarity, but actually give people like much more anxiety. And so I guess the key thing is that there are those criteria that you must meet to be selected, to even be eligible for selection. So the first thing is focusing on yourself, because if you don't meet any of the specific criteria, if you haven't got at least a B average, and if you haven't passed all your prereqs, it doesn't really matter how many students there are because we cannot consider you. So I would really encourage people to, rather than focusing on the outward numbers, is focusing on themselves and what can I do to make sure that I'm in the best position that I will be selected. Now, what I would say is that I don't recall a year in the last little while when there wasn't sort of at least 3 times the number of applicants than the places that we have. But the exact number, whether it's 325 or 347 or 442 in a year, I think is less helpful than actually just going, I just need to do I need to work hard to make sure that I'm building those academic skills and I'm building those communication skills, etc., to let me be really successful.
Perfect. There's quite a few. My poor, lovely academic advice team in the background are answering questions as very
Madly,
quickly as they can.
frantically.
And so we've got another 5 minutes of firing a few things at you, Eloise. And naturally, if we haven't answered their questions by the end of this, do feel free to either reach out to academic advice, or if you reply to the email from me with this webinar link, I just send it straight on to them and they have to answer me when I ask them nicely.
I can just say something about somebody saying, like, should we just aim for academic excellence, or should we also try and go for like balance it with animal experience? I mean, I think that I think we want to aim to do as well as possible in school. We want to challenge ourselves, and so that's why I say, like, don't take the easy classes at high school, because when you come to us at uni, we don't actually look at the results of those. We only look at the results from your uni study, and so use your high school to actually prep yourself for the uni experience. So again, take more externals, take harder classes, because if you've already met your UE, you can get into that pre-selection semester. So just use it to really prepare yourself. Now, if you're also looking at medicine and looking at Otago or Auckland, they have some slightly different things. So I won't say, but you need to make sure that you know what the situation is for each program you're looking at. But for us and vet, we pick you off your uni experience. And so the more you can prep for that, and the more you can prep to be successful in those non-academic activities like your interviews and things. So again, don't just sit in your room. Playing in sports teams and having to actually engage with other teammates and be collegial, super useful. Doing drama and debating, and and it's developing all those communication skills as well too, also really helpful. So, and the animal experience, once you've ticked the box on the 5 days in clinic, we don't actually look at your animal experience in terms of your selection process. Okay, so that's why I say I wouldn't not do a course at school that you wanted to like go do a little bit more animal experience for us anyway.
I've got a fun vet one here. In fifth year, is there a pathway for exotic vet,
Yeah,
like exotic
so
animals?
Yeah, so often we talk about exotics. Now, in New Zealand, we don't really have exotics. So when we talk about exotics in, say, North America or Asia, there's crazy spiders and snakes and turtles and all sorts of things. We do not have anywhere near the same range of exotics. So if somebody was like desperately passionate to work with exotics, it is something you're often going to do more training on after your veterinary degree. But I think it's just worth clarifying that our focus is more around our sort of big domestic species. So cats, dogs, sheep, cows, horses are kind of our big five, as well as a little bit of birds, a little bit of birds, a little bit of pigs, etc. But we don't do a lot of what I would call exotics per se.
Can any of those last placements in their fifth year be overseas?
Absolutely. So there's a certain ones you have to do here at the university, but you have around about 10 weeks or so that you actually get to determine where you're going for those. And so, yeah, a lot of students do spend some time overseas. Especially if they're international, they want to visit home or visit other places. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. I was just answering a quick question about open day here, about needing to book the vet facilities for the tour. No, you can just rock on up. It'll be open all day. There will be a couple, hopefully, during the day of vet talks. They are very, very popular.
Mm.
And sometimes we hit some really fun, like fire, too many people in the building type numbers. It is a repeat of this webinar. So if you are a little bit tight for the day and you've seen this and taken everything in, you may decide that you don't want to then watch that talk again. But obviously, every time I listen to Eloise talk, I learn a little bit more. So that's always a good start as well.
But yeah, if you
Um,
push for time, make sure you see the halls, make sure you actually check out things because you can watch the videos again if you need to.
where can I apply for vet clinical experience with flexible hours for teenagers, like still in high school age?
Yeah, so a lot of people do it where they'll either do it in the summer holidays and like knock the week off all at once, or they might do it, they might spend Saturday mornings for a number of weeks at places. You really just the only way to get is to rock up to a clinic and say, "Hey, I'm looking to do my vet practice hours. Can I come and do it here with you?" And the New Zealand clinics, there are definitely some that won't take students in that way, but a lot of clinics, they know the drill and they all did it themselves back in the day, so most are pretty approachable.
If you're a high school student and you're having a bit of trouble, sometimes your careers advisor or pathways teacher can find some ways in through some contacts. And there are some setups where you'll be able to do that during school time, but it very much depends on your school as to whether that will happen. I've got a question here about what date would you find out you've been accepted into the vet process when we make all those lovely decisions at the end of semester one? And it is a very tight turnaround.
It is a great question because, as Stacey said, very tight turnaround. So you will find out approximately 10 days before the semester two starts. So you'll be usually back at home, and then once you find out yes, no, then you do need to start pretty quickly after that. So it's usually in early July. So this year it would probably be about the third. Let me just have a quick little look. 20, 1, 2. No, actually, probably the 2nd of July, 2nd or 3rd of July this year, and then they're starting on the 13th of July. So it's a rapid turnaround.
And one thing of note in there that most of our vet students will apply for 1 full year of accommodation. So just so you know, generally speaking, that way you can keep your room for then when you get that nice tight turnaround to come into vet. If you are, say, unsuccessful in vet, we highly encourage you to then continue studying with Massey. Should you decide not to, you have a clause specifically for vets that allows you to break your lease in your hall without the usual penalties. So you're not in any way locked in for the rest of the year. So that's one thing worth keeping in mind for accommodation. I think we're sort of hitting our 8 o'clock. So what I will do, if we haven't managed to answer your questions along the way, absolutely reach out. You can either reply to the email that I sent you, or you can use academicadvice@massey.ac.nz, or that contact at Massey, which both of those will get to us somehow. I would like to do a massive shout out to Sienny and James, who have been answering questions like crazy in the background. There is nothing like a good vet webinar to keep us on our toes. And thank you so much, Eloise, for coming along and talking us through all of those. So thank you all for coming tonight. I will send out the recording hopefully in the next week or so. All right, ka kite.